I'd like to introduce three people. Fred Reinholdt is our senior therapist here at King's. He also works with Compass, and he used to work at the Johns Hopkins group, where he was a therapist in their earlier trials, and he has been supervising and providing senior therapeutic input into our trials here at King's. And he's going to talk for a few minutes about his view of psilocybin therapy, what it represents to him as a therapist. And then we have two participants from Robin's pilot trial, Roullier and Michael Bourne, and they're going to give a perspective on what psilocybin therapy meant to them as patients. And then we're going to bring that together into a dialogue and a synthesis, and that's then going to feed into a plenary discussion that involves Robin, these guys, me, and Peter Gasser, who will be dialing in from Switzerland to talk with us. So I'm going to hand over to Fred now, to talk for about 10-15 minutes each, and then move into the dialogue, then into the plenary. After that, we'll break for lunch.
I came to this work initially by trying to become a volunteer in a psilocybin study. A few years back, I was diagnosed with malignant melanoma, and I was tracked down on vacation in British Columbia and told to come home immediately because possibly the lesion had breached the skin and there might have been some metastatic problems. Luckily, of course, I'm here now and they got it all. But waiting for the results are those moments that can give one pause. You find yourself thinking and feeling and wondering about a whole number of things. And coincidentally, I've been working at Johns Hopkins for 15 years as a psychotherapist and was well aware of their research in using psychedelics therapeutically. I also knew that they were about to begin a new study using psychedelics for people with cancer. So I thought that I might leverage my situation and avail myself of the study and maybe get a stronger connection to my relationship to mortality. And so I applied to be a volunteer, but in the process of the assessment, it became clear that my cancer was really not life-threatening anymore, and my concerns about mortality didn't meet the definition of existential crisis, and so therefore I was not accepted. But also, coincidentally, because I worked at Hopkins, I had privy to their job postings. And I saw that indeed they were looking for a therapist to work in that very cancer study. And so I applied. And because of the assessment that I'd gone through trying to be a volunteer, they were well aware of my history. They knew that I had had a lifelong interest in psychedelic therapy and had read everything I could get my hands on. They knew that I probably had some people skills, having been a psychotherapist for 30 years. They also knew that I had experience working with the dying. I worked in a clinic in inner city Baltimore during the AIDS crisis. And so, you know, for years I worked with clients who were in the process of wasting and preparing for, back then, their inevitable demise. And also they knew that I had my brush with mortality. And I got to know them. And I saw that they valued rigorous science. They approached their work with a great dignity. And they interacted with participants with authenticity, and respect. And so it was a good match, and I got the job. And I ended up working with some of the world's preeminent researchers in psychedelic therapy, and was able to avail myself of their wisdom and learned very much about the importance of the quality of a psychedelic experience and how it can be facilitated by a good setting. Dosage is so important, and also how being a psychedelic therapist, it's true that less can be more. I learned that a good analogy would be that of a midwife, where one does help their participant prepare for the event, but in actuality, during the event, one observes a natural process unfolding naturally, and one only intervenes when there might be some difficulty. And then, afterwards, maybe some hints on how to feed and care for the experience. I also learned that it required, for me, to draw on all of my knowledge, skill, and understanding, having been a psychotherapist. I also learned that my greatest teachers were, of course, the volunteers. These were people who had life-threatening cancer diagnoses, and they were sort of the most brave and adventuresome people I ever knew. They were great teachers. And I can expound on that with you guys later about the importance of set and setting and dosage and all of that. So I also went on to work with different populations. I worked with people with nicotine addiction. I worked with groups that were initially taught meditation and then given psilocybin. And it was a very fulfilling few years. It was sort of like the culmination of my career, really. And as fascinating as the work was, ended up that falling in love was even more fascinating, and I fell in love with a young woman from Europe, and inevitably retired from Hopkins and followed my new bride to her hometown of St. Peterport in Guernsey, where I was quite content to hang up my spurs and just watch the bucolic sunsets over the sea. But that was not to be. I was contacted by Compass, and they alerted me that they were preparing to sponsor psychedelic research in Europe, and they invited me to consider participating in some shape or form. That has led me to become affiliated with yet another great research facility, and again working with researchers who are at the top of their field here at King's. Again, you know, the work is just so fulfilling, and it's so great to see this research proliferate. And I think the hypothesis is a very strong one that psychedelics can become a very valuable therapeutic medicine. And I can't wait to find out where it takes us all. And hopefully the gentleman with me will give us some indication of how that work and that medicine might benefit patients in maybe the near future. So if you guys don't mind, maybe you could talk about your experience.
Okay. Hi, my name is Michael Bourne. I'm not sure I can follow that, to be quite honest. I'd just like to start by saying where I came from and where I ended up. I came from a quite dark place. I'd suffered with depression most of my adult life. And it sort of culminated with the death of my mother in cancer in 2013. A friend committed suicide the year after, so things weren't going too well. And there just didn't seem to be, I'd tried all various medications, I've been backwards and forwards to the doctors, various talking therapies, CBT. Nothing seemed to be reaching anywhere to solve any kind of problem. And I was at my wit's end, basically. I didn't know what else to try. Went back to my doctor and asked if I could be referred to psychiatric services locally. But I was told that the criteria for that was quite tight, but I got an initial interview. And the interview was along the lines of, do you have a drug problem? No. Are you violent? No. Are you a criminal? No. Well, sorry, on your way kind of thing, you know. There wasn't much scope for people in my position. And I didn't know what else to try, basically. I was just out of ideas. And then it was just purely chance. I read an article about new therapy being tried in London. Psychedelic therapy. I'd had a tiny bit of experience of psychedelics in my teenage years. But, you know, that long ago I couldn't quite remember. How that had affected me other than otherwise. You know, I've been more positive about it, but I was prepared to give anything a try. And I applied, but I didn't figure that I would get, you know, because it was in London and I'm from the northeast, I didn't think, you know, I would be taken on. And plus my previous experience trying to get help in other ways, I didn't think I'd be offered any help that way. And then, lo and behold, I got a letter back, invited me to come down and have a chat. And even though this was something new to try, my outlook on it wasn't, you know, like this is going to be the cure-all or anything like that. So this was just something else to try. And if nothing else, just something that, you know, broadened my horizons for a day. That's all I thought it would. I just thought it was going to be something very short term. It might make me feel better for a week or so, maximum, something like that. I went along met Robin and James, and they went through the kind of things that would be involved. Took me to the room we sat in, so there wasn't any kind of anxiety about where we were. The only sort of slight anxiety about it was the fact it was kind of like a medical scenario. But once I saw the room, it had been decorated up in calming colours and lit very well, and, you know, I felt very relaxed in there. And it was, again, I was thinking, you know, it's going to be, it might help short term, but, you know, it's just something to try. And I took part. And it was just, you know, and it's a cliche, but it was mind-blowing. It just threw me for a loop in a positive way. I'd be here for an hour trying to explain all of the sort of the positive things that came out of it. It was just completely transformative. Everything just appeared, like the whole world appeared different in a sense that people seemed more friendly. I felt more confident in approaching people. I think I approached too many people shortly afterwards, scared a few maybe, I don't know, but I wanted to say hi and smile at everybody. It was just such a tremendous feeling that, you know, inevitable, you just can't put certain things into words, and I wouldn't even want to try. Because, you know, the more you sort of try and describe these experiences, it sort of lessens the special memory in a way that you have of them. But from that moment on, I knew that they were onto something, you know, because, as I say, I tried the medications and the treatments and the rest of it. And this was just so profound. And then afterwards, a week afterwards, 2 weeks afterwards, I was thinking, well, this is good, this is great, I'm still feeling the same way. And I don't know whether it was habit or something like that, but I kept thinking, at some point, this is going to flip back. I have to be prepared, you know, this is going to flip back, and I'm you know, I'm going to be back to the dark side, as it were. And it never happened. It never happened. I mean, sure, you know, there have been days when I've felt low, that's you know, but I would say if you look at percentages, it's maybe 80% positive and 20% negative overall since 2015, which is, you know, something. And I just can't thank this, you know, Robin and James enough, really. It's changed my life, you know, I'm a different person. And one of the key things to come out of it was that it took me back to the person that I used to be before this depression kicked in. I used to be confident, I used to be, you know, talk to people and everything else like that. And it just brought it all back. And nothing else to add, really. It was just, you know, wonderful. That's all I would say, wonderful. And now I'll hand you over to another Ian, who also took part in the trial, in the same trial.
Hi everyone, is this one? Yeah, so my experience is similar to Michael's. I'd suffered from anxiety and depression for most of my adult life. Off and on, had some very bad spells over years at times, being referred to for talking therapies. I had various antidepressants. Antidepressants for me dug me out of a hole in some ways here and there, as much as symptom management went, but they didn't really address any of the underlying issues. And the talking therapy, well, it depends who you get, it's a bit of a lottery anyway, but with the talking therapy I had, it kind of helped for a few months maybe to have someone to talk to, but it kind of, I don't know, my analogy is always that it ended up feeling like a bit of having a nice cup of tea with a friend in a way. It was kind of a little bit of an interlude, but it wasn't actually helping me to address anything either in the end. And I don't think that was the fault of the therapist. I think that was, we just got to a natural state where it just wasn't helping anymore. So having, you know, tried out various things, various antidepressants, different talking therapies, I'd also looked up online, when I was going through my last really bad period of depression. I was a freelance journalist and editor, which is a very isolating role anyway, working from home, no colleagues really. So probably not ideal for somebody that's suffering from depression and anxiety. It was isolating in itself. And yeah, things just got worse and worse. I looked online to see if there were different ways I could help myself. I read up that even sort of a walk in nature for just 2 minutes can make you feel so much better, that sort of stuff. Or tried meditating, tried writing my thoughts down, doing like a daily morning page where I'd write down all my thoughts on, you know, in words. I look back at those, some of it's horrific, because I was in such a dark place. None of those things really seemed to help, so I ended up going back to the doctor, and the doctor saying to me, well, you know, I don't know what else you expect me to be able to do for you, which when you're in that place and you're feeling desperate, is the last thing you want to hear. So any doctors out there, don't ever say that to any of your patients. So after that, I carried on looking basically to see what might help. I came across videos of people that had taken ayahuasca and their mental health problems had been alleviated by that, but for me, I found it very hard to leave the house a lot of the time, so leaving the house, going to South America, meeting a stranger in the rainforest and drinking a magical brew wasn't really on the cards, sadly. But via that, looking into that, I came across a talk from Robin at Imperial. I think at the time it was just mentioned that there was a similar, you're the scientist, but similar brain patterns or whatever in people that had practiced transcendental meditation for many, many years, and that was similar to the brain patterns in people that were under the influence of psilocybin, and that there was talk of maybe doing the trial for people suffering from depression. So it was via that, I looked on the Imperial website, got in touch with the team, and again, like Michael said, thought there was very little chance of hearing anything back, and thankfully I was lucky enough to be one of the 20 people to take part in that pilot study. To say it's very hard, because when you're in that desperate position for many, many months or years and nothing's really worked, it's very hard not to pin a lot of hope onto anything you do, like that walk in the park or whatever for 20 minutes. You think, oh, this will make me feel better, and then it doesn't. Or I'll meditate every day and then think that's going to help, and then it doesn't. I'm not saying these things are completely useless, but I think it was my mindset was, this is going to save me, this will be the solution, and as you're clutching for that, that's why it doesn't really work. So entering the trial at Imperial, there was an element of me thinking, this better work, otherwise I really am screwed. There's what else is there for me to do? But I was also kind of I tried to be aware that I shouldn't place too much on it either. So meeting the team, there was a lot of apprehension. I didn't tell many people about the trial beforehand, and someone, my friend's partner, via him, sort of said, well, you're already in a fragile mental state, why would you want to rock the boat even further by taking a psychedelic drug? So I didn't tell many people, because I didn't want their reactions to be sort of overlaid before I'd even had the opportunity to go through the experience itself. Like Michael said, it's hard to quantify briefly the effects during and after the 2 doses that I had, to be honest. There was a lot of preparation work went in, a lot of introducing me to the room, the music, the team, basically developing that trust. And because it was a pilot study, obviously time's limited, but developing that trust between you and the people that are your guides or sitters or whatever you want to call them is so key. And I think James said a while after, he was like, you didn't trust us during the first dose, did you? And I think he was probably right, not because they weren't lovely people, but there were certain things that this was a lower dose, it's 10 milligram dose followed by a 25 milligram dose the week after. And on the 10 milligram dose, I was able to still cling on to an extent and not let myself go. Which is why, and I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, that's why for me I don't think microdosing would have worked, for instance. I needed that sort of wave to sort of go completely through me. And on the 25 milligram dose, I couldn't cling on, I couldn't resist it, I couldn't fight against it really. And that was terrifying in some ways, but also just what I needed in many other ways. And I don't know if I've gone on for too long yet, but stop me if I have. I think what I took from the actual experience itself was kind of overlaid on the weeks and months after. So during the experience itself, there's a very important saying, mantra, call it what you like, of in and through. and that was key for me. It was like during that second dose I'd voiced my concerns and my resistances or whatever during the first dose, and during the second dose I was just basically told that I allowed myself to think anything goes, whatever happens here, whatever comes out, it's fine, it's all fine, it's okay. And there were some humps in the road and some very, very dark periods and demons that I had to face during that. But I was, I looked those in the eye, and it was only by doing that I ended up getting into this state of, I get ego dissolution, euphoria, bliss, whatever you want to call it. But I don't want to say to anyone in this room that's a guaranteed effect, and I don't think without the team around me I would have got to that place. I would have just been stuck, maybe, I don't know. And that's where the setting comes into it. But that approach to kind of anything goes, it's all okay, whatever emotion comes up, that's all right, is the opposite of being in a depressed, anxious state, really, where you fight against certain emotions and it's very rigid and you're just trying to protect yourself from certain thoughts, feelings and emotions. And that's what carried through to my everyday life afterwards. Like Michael was saying, I think I scared a few people afterwards with my exuberance and my kind of like, oh, it's a human, I want to speak to them, It was completely the opposite to the way I was before, which was, even with good friends, so anxious that I'd go away from any conversation and just pull it to pieces and think, I should have said that, or I shouldn't have said that, or I bet that sounded a bit like this, or whatever. All of that was just gone, to be honest. And everything just seemed a lot brighter and lighter. That lasted for about 3 months, I'd say, fully, and then tailed off between 3 and 6 months. And I think that's where, the well-worn paths in the grass, or whatever you want to call them, I'm sure there's a scientific way of saying that. Maybe my plasticity was reduced again, I don't know. It's just the old habits came back, really. I had a few very difficult times in my personal life, and when I sit here now, I'm back on one prescription drug for my anxiety, effectively, and I went to the doctor on Wednesday to see what other help they could give me. So that's the thing. It's not, I wouldn't say psilocybin is like some sort of miracle cure, but I do think that, for me, I think every 3 to 6 months having a dose for the short medium term would probably help. But again, it's having that team around you, I think, is key to that, as important as the substance.
I think it was important that you talked about trust. And I think that is probably the most important aspect of preparation. One of the primary therapeutic processes one can bring to a participant who's about to take psychedelics. Because I don't think that psychedelics on their own have the therapeutic value. I think that one has to allow the process to unfold and needs to engage in the experience for it to be the most profound. I don't think it's something that can happen to someone like electroconvulsive therapy. I think it requires that someone be willing and curious and adventuresome, and in order to be that, I think it helps to be able to trust that the medication is safe, non-toxic, that their setting is safe, that the people they're with know what they're doing and can provide a level of safety, and that they can trust their own workings of their mind, that they can trust that it's okay to feel their own pain, It's okay to experience whatever emerges. And with that attitude, the experience becomes much more meaningful and profound as opposed to just lying back and having it wash over one. Now, to cultivate that trust, I think it's important for the therapist to build a very strong rapport. And this will serve the participant in those times when, as you said, things get a little scary, right?
Yeah.
To know that the person you're with trusts that you can allow the process to unfold, that you can engage in the process, and that you can trust your own mind to work to your benefit.
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to add something very quickly. I can't remember if it was Robin or James had said this during the session, but it was just a phrase, and I was sort of conscious that, am I okay to do this? Am I okay to do that? And one of them said, it's your day, and that was it. That just struck such a chord with me. It's your day, you know, this is for you kind of thing. It's not about keeping us happy or, you know, giving us what we want. It's your day. And, you know, obviously I've not forgot that it sort of resonated. Obviously the psychedelics make things maybe feel a bit more emotional than they are, but that was particularly strong for me. But the trust issue, you're absolutely spot on with it. And my only fear, if you like, was if something went medically wrong, but then I thought I'm in a hospital, so go figure, you know. If something goes wrong, I'll just get wheeled away somewhere, I'll be fine. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Ian?
Yeah, I think that's having trust in your mind when you've been tortured by your mind for so long. That's the hardest thing, really. I was aware that people around me had faith in my ability to cope with anything that came up, and I believed them eventually, but that was the hardest thing, really. They had more faith than I did that I'd be able to deal with whatever came up. It was very hard to.
Well, I think that's when my job is done, when you can trust that I can trust you. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that serves you well in those times when it's not so easy to go in and through. But that's where the work is done, and that's where the therapy occurs, I believe, is trusting that you can tolerate whatever comes up, that you can let go, you can be open to whatever arises. I think that makes the experience much more profound as opposed to just lying back and letting it wash over you, to be engaged and curious and brave.
Go with it.
Now, I think that a lot of work in helping one develop bravery and trust can be done in preparation. I spend time providing participants with what I would call flight instructions on how one might navigate the inner realms. You know, that you still have wills. That if you are confronted with a door, that you have the will to open the door or not. And that to open the door to see what's on the other side is where the work is done. And if that door leads to a set of steps that lead to a dark cellar, the fact that you would exercise your will to dare to walk down those stairs to that dark cellar is where the work is done. And once you're in the dark cellar, to decide to go to the darkest corner and look there to see what's there. I mean, to exercise that will and that bravery, I think, really does increase the therapeutic value of the experience.
I don't know, I can't speak for Ian, but during my experience, it didn't feel like there was much of a choice. I felt like, if we're using that analogy, I mean, it's probably based on the trust, but the cellar was the way to go. It didn't seem to be a sort of an option to back away from it. It felt very, like these things had to happen. It felt in some ways external, and I can't really put that into words. And maybe that's why they seemed so profound, because they seemed to come out of nowhere, some of these situations.
Now, did you get a sense that what was presented to you was something that was almost designed for you to pay attention to, that was very personal to your situation?
Extremely, yeah. And that sort of, it kind of leads to a difficulty in a way, because some of the things that you can experience, I hate the word spiritual, because it's just like it can mean all sorts of things to all sorts of different people, but certain things that came out of that session changed my outlook on life, on university, on everything basically. And to the point where that still feels more real than this, if you see what I mean. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, I hear that a lot, yeah.
Yeah, this feels more like the game than what went on.
Now, after the session, after your experience, how were you able to incorporate that into your life? How were you able to make that work for you day in and day out in your normal awake consciousness?
Well, the only way I could do it, I used to create bits of music before I'd taken part in the session, and bits of art as well, digital art. And I'd tried sort of things over the years, and nothing really seemed to sort of get somewhere. And I thought, well, I'm happy with that, and then forget about it. But after the session, there was only really the music that I could apply that to. That was the only way I could feel like I could describe anything. I couldn't really feel like I could describe, the situation to anybody really.
But for you to be able to make contact with those experiences, you say the music helped?
Yeah, without a doubt. For words, just it doesn't seem to fit, basically.
My ways of reconnecting with the experience, I wrote what was a diary and then became a blog about my experiences day to day during the trial. And also there was the playlist that featured as part of the trial, so it wasn't music I was creating myself, it was the music that was played during the experience, and there were ways that I could kind of reconnect with those experiences via what I'd written and via the music, really.
Just makes a lot of sense,
yeah.
Did you feel like you
really
needed the playlist? I felt like I needed it.
Yeah. I think the more the effects tailed off, and the more the scared I got that the old thought patterns were coming back, and the old ways of being and thinking, the more I was sort of desperately scrabbling for it, rather than like, oh, this is great, to have.
Yeah.
But as far as feeling connected to the experience afterwards, I just was initially for the first few months. That was just the way I was living my life. I felt more me than I'd ever felt before, and that was okay. During the experience, I'd felt compassion for myself for the first time, and that's something that I've managed to retain now. Even when I feel really awful, there's a bit of cushioning at the bottom, and that is self-compassion. I know it's possible even if I don't feel it at that time.
That's good. That's definitely good.
What's that?
This level, even though he gets to a low, he knows there's a point he can't get past because of the compassion he feels for himself. It reminds me of that trough that you were putting up on the chat earlier. That sort of levels out in a way. I mean, obviously I don't follow the science and I can't, but it's in that respect. I'd agree with that as well. Even in the darkest times now, they're not
Well, I've heard that from many participants, that as much as the insight and the change in perspective has been helpful and therapeutic, it's also a reconciliation with a basic sense of a non-judgmental self-regard.
Yeah.
You know, of being able to remember who they were without the overlay of judgment and expectations, and that itself has curative powers.
Yeah.
Did you experience that?
Yeah, and memories as well. That's, I mean, I don't know how memory works, but things came back to me that's long since forgotten. Good things. And some of them were really powerful. I mean, it felt like I was going back there in a way. I've had that in the past, but since then, these sort of, you know, the smell of paint when I was a child outside the house and this kind of thing, you know, it's, I don't know how else to describe it really. It was almost like something would trigger something that was long locked away, or maybe lifting filters that were being put over it. I don't know, did you get anything like that? Or something, you know, like to the memory of a good past, as it were?
Not so much. I mean, the memories that I had during the dose itself were overwhelmingly negative. So at the start of the second higher dose, I tried resisting that. I remember thinking, I don't want to feel like this, I never want to feel like this again, which at the start of like a 6-hour trip is probably not the ideal way to go into it mentally. And then I was presented with certain thoughts and memories and images that it's almost like I could oversee my thought processes that I've had repeatedly over many, many years, so I could kind of see like a scene from the past, and I could I felt the urge to go a certain way mentally, but I could almost visualise this when I was on the second dose, and I was just like, well, I turned the other way for the first time ever. And I think a lot of us do that. We maybe try and select our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings, or whatever, and we veer away from the difficult ones. And clearly for me that wasn't something that really worked that well for me to do throughout my life, and this was the first time really that I'd faced that head on. But while that was horrific, it was a bit of a Wizard of Oz moment. The kind of fear of it was a lot greater. It didn't destroy me, you know, it empowered me because I could see that it wasn't able to destroy me.
Yes, I remember that point in your experience, and you went from being curled up on the bed to offering yourself sort of out to us, you know, wanting to hold our hands. It was fascinating. The reason why I stood up is because we're going to invite two more people to come up. Riikka, is she here? Yes. No, okay, sorry. And who else are we inviting now? Sarah. Sorry, yes, Sarah. Riikka is one of our therapists, and Sarah is she's sitting on our trial steering committee for the Psychedelic Trial, and she sits on many such committees. She's also an expert by experience, a service user, but she hasn't participated in therapy, and I thought it was important to have someone with an independent viewpoint. What we're also going to do is get a man called Peter Gasser on the line from Switzerland. Peter is extraordinary. He's the only man in the world who has a license to prescribe LSD, and has been doing so in a group setting for many years. He's also been advising us and occasionally visiting us to oversee the therapeutic implementation of our trials. So I thought that these people together, and me chairing, as a change to the schedule because Alan has to nip on, would be an interesting panel. So we will get Peter on the line. Is it
suppose in the meantime, the concept of trust for me is completely pivotal. Even in our healthy volunteer trials, when we...
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, this is Peter.
1 second, Peter.
So can he see us?
No.
No. Okay. Can you hear us, Peter?
Yes, I hear you very well. Hello.
Good, good. It's James here, and then I have Fred with me, two of the participants from the Psilocybin trial, Imperial, Riikka, and Sarah Markham, who's a service user, expert by experience, and sitting on our trial steering committee. And we've been talking. We've heard from Michael and Ian about their experiences in the psilocybin trial, and we've heard from Fred about his experience as a therapist. And we've been talking about the sort of therapeutic foundation that needs to occur in order for psilocybin therapy not to be an adverse experience and to be a positive experience. And obviously the reason why you're here is because of your expertise in this area. I think perhaps it would be useful for the audience if you could just give a very brief synopsis of who you are and what your experience is in this field. Is that okay?
That is okay, yes. So my name is Peter Gesser. Hello to everybody. I don't know if you see me also or if you hear me only. I am a psychiatrist and psychotherapist in Switzerland, and I'm in the field of mind-altering substances for 30 years now. I had the opportunity to do a LSD pilot trial from 2012 for end-of-life anxiety issue and the treatment with LSD for this indication of problems. And now we are doing a second trial, which is not a pilot study, but a larger study with 40 participants, mainly in the same area of anxiety in patients with severe diseases, for example, cancer and other anxiety problems, psychiatric anxiety disorders. Beside of that, since 2014, I have individual permission possibilities for treatment given by the Swiss Administration for Public Health, so I can treat other people with other disturbances and anxieties in ordinary therapeutic circumstances, not in a trial, not in a research project. That allows me to gather information about where LSD therapy and also MDMA therapy could be helpful for which kind of troubles, and obviously to gather information where it would probably not work. So that's my background. Is that enough, James?
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. Can you see the audience now?
Yes, now I see you.
We can see you.
Good.
So I think perhaps what we'll do is move on to a sort of question and answer plenary discussion, and broadly led by questions from the floor. I'm very anxious to bring Sarah in actually, because the one person here who I suppose is independent in a sense, and I think your viewpoint is going to be very helpful. And do you have anything that you want to say just before we start off about sort of your view of this field as a...
I think it's incredibly important. I think given the impasse that has been reached in developing new pharmacological treatments, pharmaceutical treatments for mental health, I think it's crucial that it is investigated and there is research done in this field.
Mm-hmm.
I think culturally there may be suspicion or sensationalism around it. I think that's important why these things are so important to address. Concerns by being as open and transparent. I'm very interested, this is my interest in marrying up and correlating all the different levels of evidence and investigation from the scientific, the mathematical, the neuroimaging up to the very human experience, and seeing what correlates there are, because I think that can obviously enhance an understanding of the whole process.
Yeah, and from your experience of being a service user yourself, how is the field of this different to what you've experienced so far?
I think it's incredibly open.
Yeah.
I think listening to the speakers, what they've spoken about, even though I've never had this kind of experience myself, I can definitely empathise with all that they've experienced. I think it's very, common when you're going through mental health difficulties, both the ups and downs, and trying to find treatment, to experience these things. So it's all very good to express and hear about that. I think, again, the importance of trust within the therapeutic relationship cannot be underestimated, especially in terms of wider qualities of service provision. So I'm glad that that's being raised here as well.
Yeah, and I was thinking to myself about societal stigma and how that might play into whether people are aligned with this therapy, but also whether or not the fact that it's being developed in this way may be a reassurance.
Oh, I think it is, most definitely, and it's on Twitter and it's everywhere, and it's raising awareness in a very positive, clear way, with lots of discussion, multi-dimensional discussion.
But I think I know part of my point part of the point of this symposium is recording a narrative about how we're thinking about this, because we're serious about doing it in the right way, and that's not easy. I think I'm going to, does anyone have any questions at this point that they'd like to put to the panel? You'll have to shout out, I'm afraid, we've run out of microphones.
Sure. This is a question for the participants in the trial. Thank you for sharing your experience, first of all. You mentioned, Ian specifically mentioned that you were worried in the weeks following your experience that your old patterns of thought were returning. Did either of you notice during your experience of psilocybin any kind of conscious analysis or dissembling of these patterns of thought that you previously were habitual to you, or was it more of an involuntary sort of freedom?
Yes is the answer, as far as sort of dissembling or thought patterns. So, in addition to what I mentioned before about sort of having a view of those thought patterns and ways of thinking about certain things, where I would have, something difficult there and I would pass it and go that way. So looking these things in the eye, that was one huge breakthrough for me. Just removing the fear of those things, really, that, I thought would be the end of me if I allowed them to sort of take over, really. But also certain things, certain realisations that I had during, that's the second dose particularly, the high dose. Things like, it's okay to be myself. The whole idea of worrying about being myself, which has taken up a lot of energy and time and, caused a lot of angst over the years. It just seemed, in a caring, compassionate way, ridiculous. It was like, well, what else can you be apart from yourself? It seems so blindingly obvious. So that was consciously thought through. My fear of death, which I now have again, but that disappeared as well. It was just like, well, this is the one constant. It all seems so logical, just like this is the one constant in everyone's lives, that's going to happen. So why fear it, So then, and the feeling that connection with everything as well, that connection to every sort of living thing, I still came out of it. I'm not religious and I'm still eating meat, but there were periods during that where I was just like, I remember saying out loud at one point, I think it was slightly tongue-in-cheek, I'm not sure, is this how the Pope feels, as far as how sort of heavenly I felt or whatever. But also that connection to all living things and animals and whatever, and that relating to myself and feeling that compassion for myself for the first time ever. So yeah, the short answer that I haven't given you is yes, hugely. A lot of my ideas were challenged and changed by the experience. I don't know about you, Michael.
I can only think of just the one example, really. The episodes leading up to my taking part in the trial were revolved around death. My friend's suicide, my mother passing from cancer. And I certainly didn't go in there with any ideas about, death itself, if you like. It just bothered me so much that, I'd lost two people you were obviously very close to. And when I was having my experience, I'm trying to choose my words really carefully so it doesn't come across as what I saw a place that's completely dismantled my ideas of death. I felt like I was in a place that I was only going to get a very quick look at before I had to come away. But just that quick look, it was just like a peek through a curtain almost. Just completely reassured me about the whole situation. And I had no fear of my own death, and I didn't sort of, sounds heartless, but I didn't mourn, because I felt that whatever had happened to these people, they'd gone on to something else. That's all I want to say. I don't want to get into kind of religion or anything like that. I'm not a religious person, but I felt like I'd seen something beyond this, and I knew they were okay. But I didn't go in seeking that. That just happened. That just, as part of the experience that happened.
I suppose I'm sort of conscious of the tendency to evangelise, and the setting is so important. I occasionally do voluntary work at music festivals where we provide safe spaces for people who've taken drugs, including psychedelic drugs, and you can see how profoundly traumatising they are in the wrong context. So as much as we're talking about the drug, we are talking about the fact that we are providing a safe and supportive context. And I think that the mere presence of people who you've developed a trusting relationship with and the environment of a hospital is reassuring for some people. It's not for everyone, obviously, but it is for some people. So I just wanted to cast a contrast, which is that this process can go wrong, and it can go badly wrong, and that's why we're doing what we're doing here and developing what we're developing here. So.
Yeah, can I just ask a question to Peter and to Fred, and indeed, sorry, can I just ask a question which may be most directed to Peter and Fred, but also other people may want to answer. And we're hearing a lot about the context and the, I suppose you'd say, the interaction between the drug and the setting. And what immediately springs to my mind is how you could almost operationalize that and make it scalable so it could be reproduced. So really, how you could actually say these are the things which are important. And we've heard that done to some extent, but different words mean different things to different people. And I'm just wondering about trying to do that in a way so that it's reproducible, really. That may not be possible. And I wonder about your experience with your previous research, Peter, and I wonder about the psilocybin research here.
Yeah. Fred, shall I start, or do you want to say something first?
No, please start.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I just want to put emphasis on what James just said, that the setting is so crucial. And when we started, not me, but people started to do LSD research, then first they gave it on the morgue of a hospital, and they said that this is not appropriate. And so there is a kind of really a consensus now that the setting is so important, that the setting has to provide safety basically. And I think there is also a big consensus that the setting should provide interpersonal relationship. That means people who are willing to engage and involve in the relationship, like therapists or nurses who are constantly there and provide interpersonal safety and the possibility of doing binding and attachment in that situations. And another element that mainly everyone is using is non-verbal means of contact. For example, the music. So the music, mostly everyone has a set of music, a playlist, or a choice of music playing for different purposes and goals, mainly for structuring and guiding the whole experience without going on the verbal level, because it's not so easy to have a verbal communication with the patient when he's fully under the action of the drug. And a third thing which is evolving from these tools is that the setting should be quite protected, and there is no noise and no disturbances from outside. So I think this is the three most important elements I can think that should be in every setting we are treating people with these substances.
And I think one of the questions is how does one scale this? And that's Alan's question, and it's much in my mind, and I think it is much in everyone's mind, in Robin's and Guy's and Katia, who's just joined us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that sounds terrific, and obviously it's going to be a big deal to operationalise it and make it scalable. But I also wonder about the personalisation of it. I mean, the music, for example, I looked at, we did a systematic review of music therapy about 12, 13 years ago, because we had someone who wanted to sponsor music therapy. It was a particular form of chamber music, which he was a philanthropist, and he thought that this would be good for people per se, people with brain injuries and so on. And we did a systematic review. What came out of that was that music therapy is actually quite intensely personal. So, you know, for some people it might be Mozart, for some people it might be, Scottish country dance music, for some people it might be, whatever. So I just wonder if there's an extra element. I mean, you talk about playlists. I just wonder if people should be making their own playlist, or if that may not be a good thing. And I wonder about trying to marry the competing demands of operationalising it, making it scalable, but also making it personalised. I mean, these are not trivial things, but they may be intensely important.
Well, let me say something about that. I think one can get a little too precious sometimes with trying to make the perfect playlist. I think approximation is probably good enough, because the experience can be so subjective. I know I've seen participants react to the same music quite differently. One might feel that the music was angelic, and the same piece experienced by another person would come across as demonic. Another would find it just very neutral, and yet another would not even have remembered it. And so I think you can approximate what would probably help mirror the trajectory of the experience and help it progress and be supportive without having to be very, very particular and exact, would be my personal take.
Yeah, we tend to avoid words, lyrics in music. Or at least we avoid them until the point at which the drug is starting to wear off. But it becomes very difficult to pin down what's going on.
Do you have any thoughts about this, Peter?
I didn't hear what you said, James, but I heard what Fred said before, and I was a little bit thinking about what scaling would mean. I agree totally with what Fred said. There is no, I think, something like objective factors of which music will achieve this and this goal. It is highly depending on the process the person is in. And so it is mainly more a question of what comes out from the session than the question, is it which music is appropriate in what situation. Even a music that is demonic or very difficult can be helpful for the participant because it shows up some maybe conflict or some difficulty he has. I'm not a researcher, as I can say. I'm a therapist, and I am only doing the research now because there is no other way to do the therapies with the mind-altering substances. But I think there are so many playlists that I have seen until now. People are playing classical Western music, others are playing more world music, and I think the session itself, the drug action makes that we are trying to connect the music to our inner world, and I think the connection is the important thing. The ability of connecting to the music is more important than the question of what is the objective reality of the music that is played.
Yeah, one of the things growing up as a psychiatrist for the past 15 years, I think one of the things I've found is that there can be a particular reaction against the attempt to objectify and define what a service should be in order to make it scalable, because it removes, it's almost an antithesis to the dynamic, or to the development of a reactive dynamic. So as much as there clearly needs to be a scalable element, it needs to be balanced with a sense of dynamic relatedness, I guess, would be the best way to put it. Riikka, do you want to say something about that?
I was just thinking that I would like to highlight the fact that we're not trying to create a specific experience to these people, but more like allow that natural process that is there within them already to unfold. And that's why we need the therapy or the support and the psilocybin, that we try to kind of remove some of the roadblocks that might be otherwise on the way. So that when we have that safe setting, and when we do have that support, and when these people are ready to face whatever arises within them, any sensation, experience, emotion, then this process will actually be ready to unfold.
And then you have this sort of foundation of medical support underneath that,
yeah,
which can, in the rare instances where something becomes unmanageable, we can pharmacologically intervene, which we've only had to do once so far.
In terms of scalability, in a way to cut to the chase, what's the least you can get away with? I mean, is it essential that there be two guides, for example? It's essential that there's music. Is it essential that there be two guides?
Well, I guess that research will bear that out, but my concern is that you're also looking for a certain quality of experience as opposed to just an experience. And I think when there is a deeper personal trusting rapport, and maybe even with two therapists, my guess is that the experience the participant will have will be more profound, more beneficial, and more long-lasting, would be my hypothesis. I think eventually it would become too diluted. The experience would become too diluted the farther away you got from that close human bond that allows for the trusting relationship that in turn allows the participant to go deeper and deeper into the experience, would be my guess.
I did both in my studies. Once with two therapists, female and male, and now I do it just one person, male or female, so we are a group. And I think it works both ways. It was Fred said that the quality of the relationship is more important than the number of the persons who are present. I think common psychotherapy also works with one person only, so it is not totally necessary that there are always two therapists of both sexes present for the experience. But yes, what happens between the persons who are present, what happens there, that is the important point in my experience.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of echoing what a lot of people said. I guess it's so easy for us to, probably the interpersonal relationships are fundamental. I guess the interpersonal dynamics are fundamentally crucial. I guess it's easy for us to kind of symbolize that externally by in the environment, and to allow the environment to represent the dynamics, and therefore look to recreate the external, with the danger of downstream missing that the external environment possibly just represents as a representation of the interpersonal dynamics, which are conducive to a good experience. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Well, I think it's trust, isn't it?
Yeah. And I suppose some of the physical features of the environment that we're creating could be synonymous with representations of trust and so on. And yeah, so I guess to decouple that is dangerous.
So if you can't, okay. You talked a lot about the lessons you took away from the experience of the self-acceptance, self-compassion, and sort of delving into the darkest corners and courageously accepting whatever's there. My question to both of you who participated in the study and the therapist is, can these lessons be extracted and instilled in people free of the sort of psychedelics, or do you think it's almost as good as impossible to sort of learn that at heart without the psychedelic experience? And what's been your experience with that over the years, working with patients without the psychedelics?
I mean, it's in terms of facing those and dealing with them. I can't see it would be possible without. I can't because the experience just seems so raw that I don't think I can't see how that could be replicated just with kind of therapy alone, kind of thing. And maybe that's just because I've had bad experiences with therapy or insufficient experiences with therapy. I'm not so certain, but everything feels so. You've got to learn this kind of thing, pay attention, sit up, these are lessons you need to take on board. And facing the sort of the darker things, it just became essential, it just had become essential. I mean, essentially that could be broken through with, I don't know, years of therapy, I don't know. But I didn't feel like it could be achieved without the psychedelics personally. I don't know how you feel, mate.
I agree. I think even with therapists, even though you're there to sort of open up to them, there's still a lot that you're not really giving, or not. Maybe this is just me I'm talking about, I don't know, but there's still that kind of barrier there, and the psilocybin just completely removes those barriers, or it can, and it did for me. As far as those lessons go, I'd say that they were, for a good 3 to 6 months, my absolute sort of way of living. But over time, they just faded more into concepts. And they're still very important concepts, and they're still very important ideas, and I still believe them and trust in them, but they aren't necessarily, I don't feel like I'm as able to live my life by them. And I think that's where integration after the experience is very important. And that could be through counselling sessions afterwards, dealing with those themes that have come up or whatever, or it could involve another dose or whatever. But with a pilot study, you don't have that luxury. I'm aware of that.
I would say that, in my estimation, everything that is experienced during the psychedelic session can be accessed other ways. I think they're very human experiences. But the psychedelics act as a catalyst and make these things much more readily available. Whereas I would think accessing them other ways would be a little bit more haphazard and maybe not necessarily available to the masses. But I don't think anything shown in a psychedelic experience can't be seen some other way, would be my guess.
Just want to mention that, for example, if we just look at the outcomes, for example, exposure therapies, they have really good outcomes if you really go through the whole course. But then on the other hand, how many people actually drop out? That's the key question, because many people stop before they actually reach the end of the session or the end of the course. So with psychedelics, this is a lot faster process which can actually help people to do the therapy in a shorter period of time, possibly.
Yeah, but therein lies the risk as well. Dave?
I've got a question for the service users on the panel. In the context of psychedelic-assisted therapy, would you want your clinicians to have personal first-hand experience of those states of mind themselves?
I think it's vital. I haven't used an underground therapist myself, but I'm aware that the practice is that they take the substance at the same time as you, and I have certain reservations about that personally. But I think it's very important that the people that are treating you with these substances are aware of where they can lead you mentally. I think it's a bit like everyone's map is going to be different, if you like, but if they've got a general idea of where you may end up during it, I think it's extremely important.
Of course, you could ask the same question for all psychiatric drugs, really, or maybe all medical drugs, but particularly psychiatric drugs. You know, should all psychiatrists be taking out Paranol? Probably, because then we might not prescribe it so much. Well, we don't prescribe it that much anymore, but olanzapine, say, or whatever. Of course, the question you're asking brings in the legal status of the drug, which complicates things. I would feel more confident in the doctor who's been through what I was going through. I think most people would agree with that. So, what do you think about that, Sarah?
I think it's interesting. I know a PhD student who's actually researching, whether or not it's useful for clinicians who have had mental health experiences to divulge that within the therapeutic relationship. I think it's invaluable. I think the more awareness a clinician has of what the patient may experience, either in terms of the actual disorder itself or the treatment and how that feels, I think that can be invaluable. I don't think it should be prescriptive. I don't think clinicians should be made to do that. I don't think it should be a mandatory requirement on scalability. But I think within the therapeutic relationship, I think it can, and both inform it and enhance it.
Yes. When I was at medical school, I don't know whether they do this anymore. Dave might be able to say it. And we had to pick up ball bearings with tweezers and then put them in a little funnel. And a third of us were given orange juice, a third of us were given a screwdriver, vodka orange, and the other third were given nitrous oxide. And one of us was wheeled off to A&E. I don't know whether they do that anymore, but in a sense it's valuable, because how are you meant to know what these states of mind are if you haven't experienced them yourself? But as Sarah says, I don't think that we can be proscriptive about that. Nonetheless, and going back to the mental health question, I tend to be very honest with patients about my experience with mental health. I have a history of depression. It waxes and wanes. It's followed me throughout my life. And generally speaking, I found it opens therapeutic avenues by being honest about it and open. That's not always the case. You have to make a judgment. But as a general rule, and this goes against what I was taught as a medical student, I think honesty in that context can be very helpful. And perhaps that's worth thinking about. And it's reflective of the wider sort of milieu that we're trying to create with this sort of therapy.
So, if you personally, James, had psychedelic experiences yourself in your past, is that something that you'd divulge to your patients?
Only fast. Any other question? Sean?
I can confirm, by the way, that UCL Medical School still does.
Oh, really, does it?
The same age. But the question is, it's the patients on the panel. Obviously, it's going to be circumstance dependent, but in general, what is your perspective on how active or passive a therapist should be whilst the patient is under the experience?
Did you do that, Peter?
No, not at all. Can you please repeat it?
John's question was how active versus how passive should a therapist be during a psilocybin or psychedelic session? Is that right, John? Yeah.
As a general rule, I would say you should be able to be very passive, and this is the special thing that therapists have to learn first. Because as a therapist, we are used to be active. We play an active role. We do interventions, and here you are in a situation where maybe you do not have something to do for 1 or 2 hours, and I think this is a challenge for therapists. So we have really to train this, because if the process is running well, the patient does not need the interference of the therapist, but he is quite aware that we are there. He opens maybe the eyes or opens the eye shades, and he sees, oh, the person is still there. Even if we do nothing, that doesn't mean that we are not useful. So I think we have to learn this, and at some points, even especially if there is a challenging moment, and we have to be active, of course.
And it's exactly the same with being a doctor. Knowing how to do nothing is not what they teach you in medical school. It's far more valuable than knowing when to do something. And we can cause so many problems by feeling compelled to do something when actually just waiting and seeing what happened is actually by far the preferable action, and I think creates trust.
It's the Rethinking Medicine initiative, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's the Rethinking Medicine initiative, not to over-medicalise situations, but to actually work out what's best with the patient for the patient.
Yeah, and it's accepting it's accepting to an extent both the lack of power that you have and the contrast in what you might be being expected to do by the patient, and the sort of renegotiation of that. Because much of what we're presented with, every walk of medicine, but also psychiatry, we can't do that. And it's about working with people to help them accept that and work with it as much as it is working to change those underlying things. And I think the reason why that's so important is because it's empowering for people if they have the skills themselves to accept and to work with what's going through their mind or whatever's going on in their life. that's probably...
Well, I just sort of wanted to reiterate that about the trust. And for the therapist to trust that the participant can allow the process to occur, can be engaged fully in the experience, and for the therapist to trust that what they're watching is a curative process that's going on, and that they can stand back and appreciate the work that the participant is doing and trust implicitly that there's a healing process going on that they don't have to interfere with at all.
Yeah. Many times I have to trust my patients to be suicidal or to have aggressive intentions towards others. And it's better for me to trust that they're not going to act on those than to act on their behalf, because that's the disempowering bit, and that's why I think we consultants make things worse by being expected to do something, whereas often it's said as psychiatrists that we know nothing and do nothing by other doctors. It's the stigma against psychiatry, but actually I would say that is indeed an art form that those criticisers could well learn. Maybe that's a good point to break for lunch. Thank you. It's been a fascinating session. Could you thank Peter for dialing in?